Coming up on this episode of Wild Talk, I get to chat with Big Joe Eppele from The Edge. And if you missed it, Joe completed an industry first this year, landing the legendary sturgeon, pig nose, and he caught it on camera. Joe's having one heck of a 2024 so far, including 2 amazing bears and a trip to New Zealand. Then later, I am joined by Kate Rundle for what promises to be a great social segment, and then Onyx Hunt. This week on Wild Talk. We are back with more Wild Talk. I'm your host, Steve Hamilton.
We are back at it for another social segment on Wild Talk.
Wild Talk is brought to you by Aventura, Timber Stove, Hornady, and Wild TV Plus.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Wild Talk. This next guest needs no introduction to the show. Big Joe Eppele, how you doing, my friend?
Steve, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show. It's been a while, and yeah, good to be back for sure.
It's a different sort of perspective, I imagine. Normally, you've got the Wild Talk logo behind you, but you passed those reins over to me. God, it's coming up almost a year now.
Yeah, and I could not be happier with how it's gone since. I mean, you kind of took that show from where it was, and you've completely taken off with it. So, yeah, no, it's been fun watching it grow underneath of you, and yeah, like I said, it's kind of cool to be back on as a guest now versus in your seat.
No pressure, hey? It's
yeah.
Like quite literally and figuratively, I've got some big shoes to fill here, but I'm happy to have the chance. So what's new in your world? I follow you on not only on social media, but you and I talk quite regularly, text messages and all that crap. But what's going on in your world? What's new?
What isn't new? It's been a busy time since we last kind of chatted, especially since I was last on the show. I mean, the 2024 season has been off to a pretty awesome start for me so far. Been down to New Zealand, did stag tar and fallow deer down there, which was an absolute lights out trip. Had an amazing time down there. Then I went over to Ontario, snuck in a bit of turkey hunting in Ontario, then came back to BC, and spring bear season was going, and I cut my 2 spring bear tags, so that was a ton of fun. Got my first color phase boar down. That one was a great one. He was a beautiful chocolate boar and just a great bear. And then I think, as you saw, I went out and did a bit of sturgeon fishing and happened to land one of the most notorious sturgeon on the northern section of the river there on the Fraser by Lillooet, pig nose.
That old fishing expression, you should see the one that got away. Well, as you can see, this one did get away, but it was supposed to, even though it is a legendary sturgeon in the Fraser River of British Columbia. In fact, it is so famous it goes by one name, pig nose.
Let's get into that. I had multiple text messages and phone calls from people saying, holy, have you seen Joe's fish? And the minute I saw it on Facebook, I went, holy crap, that's pig nose. So
yes,
let's get into that story. How did that trip come about, and who were you with?
Yeah, so last year and the year before, sitting at the Wild Sheep Society of BC annual banquet, a buddy of mine, Nick McCabe, we've been chatting back and forth, and he's one of the guys and owners for River Monster Adventures up in Lillooet. And we've been chatting, and we always talk about, the conservation side of the outdoors period, but then also the conservation work that they put in behind the sturgeon. So obviously, like the information that Nick and his team up in Lillooet gather, as well as Dean and some of the crews on the Lower Fraser, the information, what's the word I'm going for? The data they're able to provide. Like you could imagine, one outfitter or one guide typically spends over 100 days on the river, and they have 4 up there, and I don't remember how many Dean runs down low, but the information that one person there provides would cost taxpayers so much money to go out and gather if a biologist had to gather it on their own. And they do it all volunteer, like no funding or anything like that. But it's so important for our river systems for them to go and get these statistics on these fish, movement patterns, growth, weight, where they're staying. It helps people track just river health with regards to sturgeon and areas that they need to protect, as well as other fish populations. I think they're one of those species that's rare. Like you can't track a salmon for 10 years, 10, 20 years. Like that's just, they don't live that long. So a fish that lives in the water that long provides so many insights. And that's the kind of information they're pulling. And you still get to be on the river, sturgeon fishing. You get to land absolute monsters, and then you can be equally excited when you land like a 2-foot sturgeon that hasn't been tagged yet, and you get to, be a part of the whole process. So, talking with Nick about this, what they do up there. Finally, this year, he said, "Why don't you come up?" And I have a few days off. It wasn't an official day for him. We're just going to go run the river and do some fishing, do some tagging, and see if we can't pull some information off some of these fish. And yeah, that's kind of how I ended up, going out there. And we hit the water day one, got some great fish, tagged a first timer, and did a lot of measurements on some good like mid-range fish and even some upper, like, almost 7-footers, which were a great fight. So we were kind of super pumped with how day one went. I said, you know what, this isn't going to be a full episode because we're going to pair it with a spring bear hunt. And I said, yeah, like, we've already knocked it out of the park. Like, pressure's off. Let's just enjoy the water today on day two. And I think it was like the second or third fish. I'd been trying to hook set on a few of the fish beforehand. Don't let Joe do a hook set on a sturgeon. It's a great way to make sure you don't actually have to reel it in.
So yeah.
So then Nick on fine was like, "Joe, get out of the way." And he sets a hook. And as soon as he sets the hook, the rod just like tips in the water. He looks at me bug-eyed, goes, "Joe, get on the rod." I grab the rod. This thing almost spools the line. Like completely just zing, gone. And we're all looking at each other and we're like, "Hey, we landed some, close to 7-footers yesterday, and they were good fights, but this is something different." And it was a pretty good back and forth battle, just trying to get enough line back on the reel so he could spool me again and he wasn't going to snap off at the base. And finally, after a pretty good fight, we're getting close to the shore, and Nick jumps off, gets on shore, and he says, "Okay, Joe, start bringing the rod tip over this way so I can, get towards where the fish is and start pulling it on shore." As we're doing this, we haven't seen a glimpse of this fish yet. All of a sudden, the tail comes out of the water, and you get to do like simple math and realize, well, if the tail's over here and my line's going in the water over here, like there's fish from here to here. And we all looked at each other and went, "Oh my God, this thing is ginormous." Like everybody's jaws hit the floor. We kind of all got a little dumbfounded. And right away, Nick looked at me and his demeanor changed. He's like, "Joe, get that rod tip over here now." And just as I got the rod tip over to him and he grabbed the line, he looks at me and he says, "This is pig nose."
A former CFL player has quite the tale to tell after an encounter with a BC legend. Joe Eppele was on the Fraser River just outside Lillooet yesterday with River Monster Adventures when he reeled in something no one expected.
And I kind of went like, "Oh my God." And I think I said, like, "Can I drop the rod? Can I get in the water yet?" And he's like, "Yes, get over here." So I dropped the rod, mad scrabble, jump in the water. Pig nose has some distinct colorations on his back from age. It's like they're almost like liver spots on his back, and then he's got a very distinct nose as well. So Nick said he noticed the colorations before the nose when the tail came up. But jumping in the water with this fish, dude, I'm a big guy, but 10 plus feet long, like just over 10 feet, and the tip of its nose, they call him pig nose or her pig nose because these fish swim in really murky water, and every now and then their nose hit shrapnel, like basically sharp rock that's fallen underwater, and they can get scar tissue on their nose. Well, the average sturgeon, like their nose kind of tapers off slowly, but pig nose is so old and hits so many rocks, it's kind of this scar tissue, and it's like a snub nose. And that's why they call it pig nose. But I got in the water again, over 10 feet. I think it's over 4 feet around. And the best estimate is somewhere around 800 plus, 750 to 800 plus pounds, and anywhere between 80 to 100 plus years old. Not too often I feel like minuscule next to something, but that sturgeon, getting in the water with it, I was just like so overwhelmed, so overpowered. Just, yeah, leaves you in awe.
What's really, really cool about these fish is they are strictly catch and release here in British Columbia, and they are so resilient. And as you touched on, we got guides that are giving so much of their time, money, and effort to ensuring the viability and the survivability of these species. And through catching them, we are learning more about not only the fish, but what we can do to protect them in the future. And I Pignose is just, it's a legend. And has Nick and his crew ever caught Pignose before?
Yeah, Nick has caught. I think this was the third or fourth time that they've caught it as an outfit or as a guiding outfit. Nick. So interestingly enough, the cool part is Nick's got a lot of history with Pignose, and not that they've caught it a lot of times, but the first year they started River Monster Adventures, they landed Pignose. So 9 years ago, they caught Pignose, and it was one of those fish that really put their outfit on the map. It really, and it brought a lot of attention, and it kind of raised a lot of awareness for this fish and the species. So that's kind of cool. Is it's one of those pillars of conservation for the group, for the waterway up there, that draws a lot of attention to who they are and what they do, and makes all of that data collection and everything possible. So, because of that, I think they've caught Pignose, like 2 or 3 times since, or 1 or 2 times since. So it's rare experience, but there is that history, and knowing that this fish was caught 9 years ago healthy and has only gotten larger and healthier since does show you that the information they're gathering is obviously helping.
So what was the overall nose to tail?
So we had a few different measurements, but kind of the most, you can imagine big fish in the water, and you're using these flimsy tapes, but I think the most consistent measurement we got was right around 10 foot 1 inch. The circumference was, I think, like somewhere between 49 and 50 inches around.
And what was Ecklin's biggest?
So true story. So Steve's, I'm pretty sure Steve's might have been an inch longer. Thanks for rubbing that in. So, and again, other crazy fact about Steve's, I think, is his was 10.2. I don't know what the circumference measurement was on his. His might not be as fat, but also, I got to throw it in there that Pignose has beat his nose down a bit. So maybe he'd sneak those 2 inches out of there if he had his full nose. But Steve's fish had never been tagged. So that fish was who knows how old, and an absolute jumbo. And any guide outfitter that catches a sturgeon along that river, if the fish has not been tagged, they tag it. So this fish has gone in there undetected, uncaptured for that long. So again, that kind of forces you to imagine and think, these fish are out there. So there could be an absolute giant that has not even been captured or seen. Like there could be a 14-footer. So the next person that goes out, like you never know. When you go out with these guys, you could be going out, okay, I'll catch a few 4-footers, a few 6-footers. You could pull in the next largest sturgeon ever landed. Both Steve's and my fish were completely off the charts. So all the numbers we throw out there with regards to weight, with regards to age, without hauling the fish out of the water, doing damage and potentially killing the fish, you'll never know those answers. Unless Steve and I had our fish side by side, who knows? But what I do have to say is it is unbelievable that both Steve and I went up and fished with Nick and the crew at River Monster Adventures, and we both landed fish in a lifetime. So just shows you, like, these guys are out there, they run the rivers 100 plus days a year each, and they know what they're doing. That's for sure.
So before we started recording, you mentioned the social media impact on it. How's that been?
The one sturgeon post I've done has been 100% the most kind of shared and reposted. Shared and reposted post I've ever done. Like Frankie Sullivan, the guitarist from Survivor, Eye of the Tiger. He even was on there liking it, like a ton of like big authors. It's pretty cool. I think people really like the idea, the fact that it's a catch and release experience for the studies and the science behind it all, as well as potentially the largest fish ever, or sturgeon ever caught on camera, I should say. Not the largest sturgeon ever caught, but the largest sturgeon caught on camera while being recorded. So I think all of that just created a lot of excitement. And again, it's pretty cool to be able to be a part of taking a conservation story and gain that much hype around it. Like all of the funding they do for these studies is self-funded by the sturgeon guides, the societies they're in, or private donations. There's no government funding, no nothing. So anytime you can raise more awareness for the work they're doing and the importance of it, it just makes you kind of feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's
where I wanted to go with that little segment there, is the amount of eyes you have got on this fish shows the incredible work that the guides are doing, and the attention they're bringing to the species can only do great things for in the future.
Welcome back to Wild Talk, everyone. Today we are joined by Dylan Dowson. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to catch up and chat with you guys. So
onX Hunt is a crazy good app. So let's get into the services that it provides.
yeah, so we offer a kind of a variety of things. We started out in the GPS technology side with a physical, tangible chip that you could plug right into your GPS. Fast forward to today, everybody's got one of these in their pockets, smartphone. So essentially, what onX does is it turns your smartphone into a handheld GPS device. So with technology advancements and advancements with onX internally, there's really not a need for a handheld GPS device anymore. Everything is fully integrated right into your phone. So again, think of it like turning your phone into a GPS device itself. It'll show your current location. You can track yourself, mark waypoints, tracks, routes, lines, anything that you could with the standard GPS. On top of that, it shows you where you are on the map in relation to those boundaries. So instead of wondering, how much farther ahead is that public or private land boundary, you can just look and see your GPS relationship in relation to that. So it does a lot more things, but from a high level overlook of what onX Hunt does, that pretty much covers it.
All sounds amazing. What was the inspiration behind designing onX?
Yeah, so when onX's founder, Eric Siegfried, he actually moved to a different part of the state in Montana, and he was a big hunter himself. And with the move, he didn't know where he could and couldn't go legally. He didn't know where all the boundaries were, where the good spots were, etc. So he essentially built the product for himself to satisfy his own need of, okay, what is private, what is public? If it is private, who owns that private property in this part of Montana now that he lived in? And so essentially he figured out a way to build a product and make that micro SD chip usable within his GPS, and started using it for himself and realized that he was onto something. So we started out in Montana, being a Montana product, and then expanded to several other states. Now we've got all 50 states in the US. We do have Canada now, and expanding on other areas as well.
You mentioned that he felt that there was a niche that needed filling for his own use, and it's expanded huge since then. So when did he decide that, hey, you know what, this is an app that I want to do?
Yeah, so 2009 is when the company was founded, and for the first few years it was the physical GPS chip, and then the app kind of came out a couple years later. So I've personally worked with onX at onX for about 9 years now, and when I first started on in 2015, we had the app. It was in the early stages, and since then, technology advancements have just allowed us to do so much more with it. So, as well as the new cool features and the 3D exaggeration and all of the crazy technology that you can implement into the map now. Just really the reliability is what we're mostly excited about with those advancements. Is it just works? I mean, it works as if you had a handheld GPS device in your hand.
I know I don't go anywhere without my phone, so this is a piece of kit that I am really looking forward to exploring a little bit more.
Absolutely. It sounds so helpful. So like you mentioned, apps are always evolving. What is on the horizon for onX? What new this year do you have coming up?
Yeah, so that's another cool thing is we have we have our own engineers, software developers, and everything in-house. So because of the success of the company, we're able to then hire and manage and really build ourselves up for success for the future and not be complacent, right? There's a lot of things that we can do. There's some really cool things we're wanting to do, and we've got some long-term planning for. Some of the recent things that have came out, our new compass mode within the app. So instead of marking waypoints and not being 100% sure if they're precise, now a couple quick taps within the map. So you go to your location, turn it into what we call compass mode, and then you can actually orient the phone. So you can turn the phone and line it up, and using the waypoint option, you can range something and say it's 723 yards, then you can type in 723 right on your phone, line that up, and drop that waypoint. So now you know that's in the exact precise location of whether it be a downed animal you're going to hike over to try and find on the opposite hillside, or maybe you're making a stalk on a bedded buck, etc. So that's just one example. There's a lot of really cool new features, 3D improvements on the phone with 3D exaggeration. So if you do happen to find yourself in an area that's not really crazy mountainous terrain, if you turn it into 3D, it might not be exactly what you're looking for. But with the 3D exaggeration, there's a slider scale bar to where you can just exaggerate that, and it extrapolates the 3D up into where a more usable and real life scenario. So if you are whitetail hunting in some rolling hills, or again, if you're not in crazy 2,000-foot mountain differences, you can just exaggerate that up, and it will extrapolate that up. So that's another cool new one that we recently launched.
So where can someone like myself find this app?
Yep. So lots of different areas that you can find us. Basically, if you want to download it, we do offer a risk-free trial. So you can try it out, make sure it's going to work for you. So if you just go to your app store and search onX Hunt, it's going to pull up, and then you can start your trial and go from there.
I can't wait to get my hands on it. So a huge thanks from all of us at Wild TV and Wild Talk for joining us, Dylan. We'll catch you again sometime.
Thank you, guys.
Yo, everybody, Kate Rundle here, back at it with another social segment on Wild Talk. For this week, we're going to bring you some deadly vids from the next generation. Let's go see what these young kids are up to. In 3, 2, 1, let's go.
Oh, that's a good buck. Okay, watch out. Lots of bear around here.
Yeah!
Oh, good shot right in the dome.
Swing him in. Swing him in. Come on, pick him up. Oh, that's a bigger one. Oh!
Oh, my hug and my fishy.
Good job.
Thank you.
Alrighty, just goes to show if you start them young, the possibilities are endless. Let's keep going.
Yeah, that's all we need. And we ain't gonna hurry, ain't in a hurry. Everything is going our way. We're gonna have some good times with good friends, making good memories. Everybody's moving to the song on the radio. Little Stevie Wonder never hurt nobody.
Good shot, dude. That's a dead deer.
Hunting, fishing, loving every day. That's the prayer that a country boy prays. Thank God he made me this way.
Alrighty, that's a wrap today. Thanks to all the young kids that were featured on this week's episode. Till next time, stay wild, friends.
Welcome to another episode of Wild Talk. I'm your host, Steve Hamilton. Going to do something a little bit different this week, and I kind of need to get some stuff off my chest here when it comes to hunting and trapping and angling right here in British Columbia. So for decades, the narrative around public consultation has always been the same here. We tell you to write to your member of the Legislative Assembly. We tell you to meet with your member of Parliament. We ask you to meet with them face to face, that they represent you, that they're here to listen to your concerns and base the legislation that they propose around what you want to see, and we want it enacted in legislation. So recently, BC's hunting and trapping regulations have set a dangerous precedent by continuing to rely on emotion and political consideration rather than science and reliable data. BC has some of the lowest hunter density numbers in North America, and further restrictions based on political popularity are not required, and they're not welcome, to be honest. We have over 40 years of policies and procedure in place to ensure that harvests are sustainable and that wildlife is supported and conserved. So as members of the outdoors community, you're trying. We see you trying. You're engaging on proposals. You're attending the town halls and the information sessions that are going on around the province. But you're continuing to watch our wildlife populations decline and our habitat erode, and you're screaming as loudly as you can. You need to do something about it before it's too late. So the provincial government recently comes back with this document, like they did in May, and they're the new hunting and trapping regulations, and they tell you that the way they're written, they're going to benefit wildlife. So you might be justified in thinking that they're not, in fact, listening to you. And they're not. They're not representing the best interests of the people. So together we need to be focused on protecting endangered species. There's no arguments about that. Hunters want to restore wildlife wherever possible, and they need to use sound data and the government's own existing policies and procedures to guide harvest regulations. We need to get away from this emotional feel-good stuff that they keep trying to thump out there. So if you feel like this, you're not alone. There's enough of you out there that feel that way, that when we stand together these elections coming up, we're going to make a difference. Most elections are won and lost on 60 to 80,000 votes. That is it. Hunters, anglers, and sport shooters and conservationists can control the tide of elections. We just need to use our voice, and we need to stand together, and we need to stop the infighting. So this is a battle that we're facing around the world. We've had our friends from Blood Origins on, Howl, Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management. Seems no matter where you go, we're facing these emotional policies. So if we do not get loud as a community of conservationists, we're going to continue to see emotion dictate wildlife policies. It's going to close down hunts. Then all we're going to have is these memories, and we're going to really watch wildlife populations crash. We need to stand up united, as I've said. We need to hold our elected officials responsible for their decisions. So just keep that in mind. So rant over. We'll be right back with Big Joe Eppele. We're going to chat about what's new in his world. Let's get into New Zealand. How did that trip come about? I saw you went with quite the ragtag group of people, and I'll leave names out. They know who they are. And yes, I'm talking about you, if you think I am. So how'd that trip come
about? Well, Steve went down there the previous year. So he went down there last year and had a great hunt with Sandy and Carl, the two guides at New Zealand Wilderness Hunt.
Right.
And had an absolute blast with those guys down there. And came back and he just told me, he said, Joe, like, New Zealand, it gets a lot of hype, but this experience was everything and more that I expected from it. And he said, we have an opportunity to book again for next year. Are you interested? I said, absolutely. If there's a spot, put my name on the list. And then, we brought in Chad and Byron, who are just nothing but comic relief, but certainly know how to get the job done as well. And, we went down this year, and everything kind of just came together in such a great way. Like, we went in, the anticipation was 4 guys, 2 guides. You know, if we can get even 50% of the excitement that Steve had the previous year, we'd be doing well. We get in there, we hit the roar right on the button for the stag portion of the hunt. It's kind of that early September vibe, still hot, but the stags are roaring. Like, it's peak rut. Get a great hunt in there, have a ton of success. All 4 guys tag out. I think I was the last one to tag out. I was being pretty picky, wanting to get one like deep in the bush rather than kind of closer to the lower hills. But yeah, like day 6, day 7, I got my stag, but we all could have tagged out earlier. And then after, getting from there, we were like, okay, well, we wanted to go up and go West Island for tar, which is where the really exciting, like, mountainous stuff is. You chopper in, you get set up for a camp, and you stay in the Alpine for a week. But unfortunately, that area was getting absolutely smashed with a huge storm, like 700 plus mils over 5 or 6 days. So they told us, like, that's just not an option. We have a day of good weather. We can get in there, but there's a chance we might be stuck for like 1, 2, 3 weeks until this storm passes, and we're just going to be in a tent. So we said, yeah, let's go to a different location. So we ended up hunting more kind of, not quite the Alpine, but the subalpine on East Island, or the East Coast, I guess. And luckily, it was still at the time of year where they're almost kind of in their bachelor herds. So we went in there, and we were still going to get hit with a pretty good storm, but not as bad as the West Coast. So we went in there with the mindset, like, if we get good opportunities, don't be super picky, but make sure it's a good quality animal and a good age class. So, I mean, we went in there, and it just happened. We got into an area that hadn't been hit with a ton of pressure. And I think it took us 2 or 3 days. And all four of us, again, boom, tar tags, cut. And we're sitting like, what's happening? We got 5 days left on this trip, and the boys have cut like our stag tag, our tar. And then Sandy and Carl told us, they said, listen, we have another area we can go to, and they're having a problem with wild pigs and possums. So like we can spend 5 days hanging out, see more of the country, and we're going to go hunt some wild pigs and some possums. So that's great. And they said sometimes there's fallow deer in the area, but they don't rut for another 15 to 20 days. So, but we might get a glimpse at something like that. So like, okay, cool. So we pack up, we move along, get to this new location, and go to sleep the one night. The next day we're going to wake up and go hunt fallow deer. Well, overnight, storm front hits there, wake up, and it went from being like t-shirt weather to there's frost on the ground. And anybody who hunts that kind of early fall season knows when there's a significant drop in temperature, you might get an early rut. So we go out, we're dropping the windows, getting ready to do our first pig hunt, put the windows down in the truck to glass for pigs, and we hear this croak sound that sounds like a bullfrog on steroids. And all of a sudden our guide's eyes light up and they go, boys, like, this is ridiculous, way ahead of schedule, but those are fallow bucks grunting. Like that's what they do when they're in a rut. So lo and behold, a few days later, without going into too much detail, 3 out of the 4 guys ended up tagging out on fallow bucks. And again, all free range, like just absolute beautiful animals. So, I mean, I think I could hunt New Zealand for the next 10 years and never have an experience like what we had. We just happened to hit the perfect timing for the stag, and then the storm front that followed us around just seemed to check the boxes for us as we went along. So certainly one of us had a horseshoe hidden somewhere.
Yeah. It sure sounds like it. So you get a chance to try any of the meat?
Yeah, we ate meat on all of them. We can't bring any back, so the meat that we didn't bring back stayed there. It goes to the local farmers, or they use it for the next group of hunters, things like that come in. But yeah, we had stag, we had tar, and we had fallow. I would say stag was very akin to kind of the red deer we had in Argentina, but also very similar to like an elk. And then the tar was delicious. It was kind of more like a blacktail slash deer type taste, I would say, but it was tougher. It was noticeably tougher. But they're also a pretty rugged animal. And then the fallow deer was like spoon tender. But oddly enough, I would say that one was the quote unquote gamiest tasting meat of them all. Like it did have a bit of almost a rut taste, which was odd because they were pre-rut. But yeah, there was a noticeable distinct flavor to the fallow. But again, all 3 were delicious, and yeah, I wish I could have brought some home, that's for sure.
So watching the social media of the trip there, looked like there was a bit of some issues, some technicalities going down there or something?
Greg, our cameraman, had his flight canceled due to weather, and everybody else was able to get down, no problems, no logistics issues, but you can't do much filming for a show without kind of your camera guy. So Greg, fortunately, was held back a day, and then during one of our stopovers, a bag got lost, and I think it was Stephen Byron's, one of Stephen Byron's bags that had some important gear for them, was lost in Vancouver.
Yes.
Somehow it got dropped in Vancouver. That might be what you're talking about. So luckily, like, it was 2 unfortunate incidences, but that bag got on that flight because we were able to contact the airlines, discuss the whole situation with them, and Greg was able to be there and make sure that that bag actually got on the plane in Vancouver. And then again, when it landed in New Zealand, there was one additional, was it New Zealand? I'm trying to remember where it was. Yeah, it was in Auckland. So when it landed in Auckland, there was one more flight jump that happened there, and the bag almost got left again. And just before Greg got on the plane, he said, by the way, have you guys checked this bag, and had the bag number? And they were able to pull it up and went, oh, no, this still hasn't been checked in properly. They went and grabbed it. and threw it on the flight. So if Greg hadn't been delayed, that bag, who knows, it would probably still be sitting at an airport somewhere because the airport staff clearly did not care about it too much.
So it all worked out in the end, though.
Oh man, like I completely even forgot about those stresses at the beginning of the hunt because everything after that played out so perfectly. Like we were all just sitting there going, like, somebody pinch me. This just does not feel real.
So how long is the flight from Vancouver?
Somewhere I can't remember distinctly. Somewhere between 13 and 15 hours. But again, not a terrible flight, oddly enough. So you fly through the evening. They use tinted windows on the plane, so like even if you want to open the window, you can't. Like it still looks dark. And it worked out. Like we slept really well. It's Air Auckland or Air New Zealand, Air Auckland, and I mean, or Air New Zealand, sorry. But probably one of my like most enjoyed flights that I've been, especially like a long haul flight like that. Staff was great. Flight was awesome.
And a guy your size cannot sit in regular like seat.
No.
Where do you?
No. I typically on those long flights, those really big wide planes, I try and get one kind of in that emergency exit or right at the front of a row. So that's for me as well as anybody that has to sit next to me. Because my shoulders kind of automatically overflow into the seat on either side.
Yeah.
And I just got to say, like, if there's anybody with an airline out there watching right now, what's the deal? Everybody else gets special treatment. Like, physically, my femur does not fit in most planes. Like, there should be a box you check when you're checking in for a plane or, like, booking a seat where it's like, okay, if you're, 6'4" and above or 6'3" and above, physically your legs do not fit into certain seats. Like, there should be a box, just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those that don't know how big Joe is, just Google him. I've stood next to him and went more than once. So I want to get into your chocolate bear. I've never shot a color phase. That thing looked like a monster.
It was a good bear. I wouldn't say it was an absolute monster, but I mean, just perfect bear for the location it was in. It was a bit of a gnarly pack out in the last light shot as well, or close to last light, and I was solo. So I wasn't disappointed when it wasn't one of those, 7.5, 8-foot boars, but it was, top end of 6s and just big, heavy bear, beautiful cape on it, thick cape as well. And tons of great meat. Honestly, I was surprised because this year I really thought it was going to be an early spring bear season because we had a lot of hot weather early on, but then like kind of right as I was expecting things to really kick off, we started getting this weird, it wasn't really cold, but like the mountaintops were getting snow again. We got a lot of overcast, temperatures seemed to kind of hold a little lower. And to be honest, like here in BC, I haven't really, like I've seen in some of the areas, especially like more coastal BC, but it seems like the season has really kicked off in the last week and a half, which was completely contradicted what I expected going into the season. And then when I got my chocolate bear, he was my second bear of the season, but he still had like really long fur between his pads. And that's a sign that the bear's really just coming out for the year. Yeah. So like once they start walking and cruising, obviously they're going to break off all of that hair between their pads. So he still had really long hair between his pads, which means like he was just fresh out, which is, interesting to see that late in the spring, from my perspective. But again, really cool bear. Like I would have been, I was just absolutely tickled and getting a whole bunch more meat back in the freezer. Can't ask for much more.
Yeah, you said you were solo on the brown bear, right? The chocolate?
Yeah, the chocolate, I was completely solo. I self-filmed it, got some pretty cool content on it. But yeah, that one was full solo. I wasn't actually supposed to head into the bush for another 3 or 4 days to go back with my second bear tag. But work was slow, to be perfectly honest. I was sitting at the desk and it was I had a few meetings canceled. And I was watching the forecast and kind of tracking what the weather was going to be doing. And then I just had one of those feelings like, I need to get out there today.
Yeah.
And I grabbed my gear and I told the wife, I was like, I'm gone. I'll be back tomorrow evening, heading out for an evening of myself. And I got there and there was a few spots I wanted to check. And as I was getting into the second spot I really wanted to check, that's immediately, it was like it timed up perfectly. I got there, put the glass up, and right away it was just obvious in my glass. And I just went, oh boy, time to get serious here. And things played out. it was, yeah, tricky, probably 2.5 hours to get in on the bear where it was located, from where I spotted it. And then I was really trying to push in close with my bow and managed to get right around the 100-yard mark. But it was a tricky location where it was. It was in a clearing and along the edge of the clearing, really thick vegetation. So I didn't have the option to go back in the trees. So I was having to stalk basically directly towards it. And yeah, right around the 100-yard mark, it turned and it was going to the trees. And I really wanted to get it with the bow. So I kind of hesitated. But as it got closer to the trees, I kind of made a decision, dropped the bow, pulled my rifle off. It's heavy grizz country where I was hunting the bear too, so you have to have a rifle with you at all times. So bow went down, rifle came up, and then yeah, that made quick work of the bear. And luckily for me, right at last light, so mosquitoes are getting nice and thick, and then the boar decided to pile up in a big meadow of stinging nettle. So that was a treat. Last light, breaking a bear down in grizz country, covered in mosquitoes and stinging nettle, but. Hey, it makes for a better story, I guess.
It does. At least spin it the way that you're a forager as well. So you had snacks you had the greens to go with the bear meat, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had the greens to go with the bear meat, and then I think for about a day and a half, it felt like I had my finger permanently in a light socket because I just had this buzzing on my skin from the mosquitoes and stinging nettle.
Oh, I hate stinging nettles. And the mosquitoes again in the last week have just kicked right off as well. We when we were out this past 2 weeks ago with the guys, we went into an old burn area southwest of town, and we came out of the Forest Service road, and this monster grizzly walked out in front of us, and he didn't care we were there. He was big. He was the dominant boar, and one of the guys said, "Well, if we were out, what do you think he would do?" I said, "You're not getting out to find out," because we literally followed him and we were honking at him and yelling at him to get him to bugger off. He stopped. He went broadside, probably 100 yards away with the truck. We're leaning on the horn, and he starts stomping, and you hear the hoof hoof, and he's growling at us like, "Okay, you own this place right now." And then he buggered off into the bush, and then we drove down about another kilometer to intersect the main road. And we saw a couple of young girls in like a Honda Accord, like 70K down a Forest Service road. And we're like, they're here for mushroom picking. We should probably tell them that there is a big bloody grizzly down the road. But thankfully, these girls went the other way. So haven't heard anything on the news about missing people, grizzly attacks. So my conscience is pretty happy there. As we wrap this up, I want to know, you've already had a kick in 2024. What's in store for the rest of 2024 for you?
I've got a busy year ahead of me still. That's the craziest part. Coming up next, I'm heading to Haida Gwaii to do my first Sitka blacktail hunt. I'm going to do Sitka blacktail, and I'm going to do some ocean fishing with Sandspit Adventures while I'm over there. Then I come back, and I'm going to be doing likely a fly-in goat hunt. I'm going to be doing a goat hunt. It's whether or not I hike in or fly into this one area I'm looking at. So yeah, goat. Then I come back and I've got elk hunting after that. Then I'm heading over to Newfoundland to do moose. That's going to be an archery moose hunt. And then I'm going to come back. I'm going to try and sneak in a late season sheep hunt if I'm lucky enough to do so. And yeah, somewhere in between there, I'm going to sneak in a few deer hunts. I got blacktail, whitetail, and muleys here in BC. And of course, I got to keep my wife busy and get her out on a few hunts. So luckily, I have a lot of freezers, and I just really hope that this horseshoe sticks around a little bit longer so I can keep this momentum going, because something tells me this is going to be one of those years that you write about in your journal, and it's going to be a tough one to top.
Yeah. Your son's going to be talking about it to his grandkids. I remember when...
He's already talking about it. He's 2.5 years old, and he already runs around and tells everybody, "My dad, big fish," and then like, oh, I just love watching him tell the stories.
Oh, I love that, my friend. So when you pop through here to go to Haida Gwaii, you got to fire me a text. We'll get together for a coffee.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan to me.
Awesome. Let you get on with your day, my friend. Can't wait to see what you got in 2024. It's going to be weird, but thanks for joining me on Wild Talk.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Wouldn't be any better any other way. Thanks, Steve.